actually, it's about really our language, because once you start using the W word, war, people almost assume that there's a natural, inevitable slide from disinformation and cyber attacks to missiles slamming into your cities. And I think we have to appreciate that in the 21st century, there are all different types of conflict. At the moment, absolutely, Putin himself says that, in effect, Russia is at war with Europe. But there is absolutely no signs that they are preparing some kind of imminent military response to that. It is this whole spectrum of non-military ways in which Russia can try to bring consequences to bear on us.
The Russian embassy has issued a warning to the UK after the Sunday Times reported that British-made drones had been used in strikes on targets deep inside Russia. In a statement on its website, the embassy said Britain would face the consequences for deliberately escalating the war in Ukraine. Dominic Housechild, the Sunday Times defence correspondent, broke the story on Sunday and spoke to Times Radio Breakfast then about what he'd found.
One of the companies is BAE Systems. Its drone is the Nyam one-way effector, which is a sort of a sleek little jet-powered drone. And there's also a second drone. I do know the name of the drone and the company, but we've chosen to keep it a secret for security reasons. But I have been told that it is a catapult-launched drone with a range of around 600 miles. And sources in the Ukrainian military told me that it's been particularly effective as part of their deep strike campaign.
Lillian Greenwood is Labour's Work and Pensions Minister. She responded to Russia's latest threat to the UK.
Well, our message back to the Russians is that we stand with Ukraine. We've stood with Ukraine throughout this time when the Russian illegal invasion. We will continue to do so, and we won't be bullied in this way.
Let's speak to Mark Galeotti, the founder of Mayak Intelligence, who often writes for the Sunday Times about Russia and Ukraine, appears on this station as well. Mark, morning to you.
Morning.
There was a period in which Western countries were very reluctant to arm Ukraine to take the war into Russia. It was very much about defensive munitions that were supplied. Did that change at a certain point?
I think it was an inevitable, shall I say, sort of mission creep, because the fact of the matter is that in modern war, there are no such thing really as purely defensive or purely offensive systems. And the only way that Ukraine can try and hold its own is precisely by reaching out into Russia and bringing the war to the Russian economy.
And does that make our relationship with Russia any different? I was trying to say, can you be a little bit pregnant on this? That either you're supporting Ukraine to fight Russia and therefore our relationship with Russia is one of enmity. Does it make a difference if the drones are UK supplied that go into Russia in terms of our relationship with Russia?
I mean, in a way it does. It's clear that there is a considerable degree of anger in Russia. I mean, which I'm not in any way supporting. This sense that somehow, Europe is unfairly treating Russia. But I think, we should recognise that this threshold has already been crossed when, for example, we provided Storm Shadow cruise missiles, which again can reach into Russian territory. At that time, we were told, oh, you're crossing a terrible red line. So, in a way, this is a whole war that has been defined by multiple red lines being drawn by the Russians, then being broken, and no dramatic results happening.
Because at a certain level, Mark, we talked about this before, we are at war with Russia to a certain extent. Russia involves in misinformation in our country. We've seen examples of actual crimes, arson and the like being committed at the say-so of Russia. We've had Russia send people into this country, which has led to the death of British citizens. To a certain extent, our relationship with Russia is what it is. It's one of hostility.
It is. I mean, this is one of the problems. I'm going to get all academically pedantic here, and actually it's about really our language, because once you start using the W word, war, people almost assume that there's a natural, inevitable slide from disinformation and cyber attacks to missiles slamming into your cities. And I think we have to appreciate that in the 21st century, there are all different types of conflict. At the moment, absolutely, Putin himself says that, in effect, Russia is at war with Europe. But there is absolutely no signs that they are preparing some kind of imminent military response to that. It is this whole spectrum of non-military ways in which Russia can try to bring consequences to bear on us.
And they already exist, they're already happening.
Yeah, exactly, which is one of the reasons why I can't help but feel that in the Russian embassy's statement about consequences, unspoken consequences, In some ways, that is actually an expression of impotence. Yes, there is more that Russia could do if it really was willing to escalate. It could try and launch more sabotage attacks, for example, against the factories producing drones. It could try to kill the chief executives, as they reportedly have tried to do to the German company Rheinmetall, which supports the Ukrainians very strongly. But all of those escalatory acts would also have costs. And I think at the moment it's fairly clear that Moscow feels it has a hell of a lot on its plate and isn't necessarily looking to escalate beyond the rhetorical.
I'm very struck by Russian rhetoric, Mark. You might say this is unfair. Is there something in the way of Russian speaking? There's something faintly camp, faintly absurd. When I listen to the embassy, there's just something slightly archly camp about it all. I don't know if that's right. Maybe it's just that's just a translation. There's just something in the way. Is that to do with the Russian mindset, the way it talks about hostility? Or am I misreading that?
No, I do take what you mean. Yes, in part it is an artifact of translation. Russian and English have very, very different languages, as I know to my own cost. But I think it is also the fact that precisely from the Russians' point of view, there is a theatricality to all this.
Yeah.
They are using their words with the hope of creating a political effect, and therefore I think they are much more conscious of the dramaturgia, the sort of the staging and the sound of their language, rather than just simply trying to communicate a message.
That's so interesting. But this will continue just fine. We're not going to change our policy. Ukraine is not going to stop heading into Russia. The war is sort of on a fixed course at the minute.
I think so. I think in a way everyone is currently locked into the current status quo. Ukraine cannot do anything other than maintain its campaign. Putin does not seem willing to do anything, and in those contexts, of course, Europe will continue to support Ukraine.
Yeah, really good stuff, Mark. Good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. That's
Mark Galeotti, the founder of Mark Intelligence. I did like the way he said the Russian word dramaturgia. I thought was wonderful.
With a more theatrical edge.
I'm joined now by Elizabeth Braw, security expert and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Elizabeth, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us. How seriously should we be taking Russia's language here? Is this a serious warning, or is this just more of an attempt to sort of worry the UK and deter it from continuing in its support?
Well, anytime somebody in an official capacity in Russia threatens the UK, we should take it seriously. But we should remember this is what the Russians always do to try to prevent the UK and other countries from helping Ukraine. So really, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, every time the UK was thinking about supporting Ukraine in some way, there came some sort of threat from Russia saying, if you do this, this and this will happen, and the UK, to its credit, has steadfastly helped Ukraine despite those warnings, and this is another one of those warnings.
And so the drone strikes that we're talking about here, using British-made drones, is that is that a thing that Ukraine is able to do with British support that it would not be able to do without British support, or is this just simply sort of some drones among many of these ones happen to be British?
Well, it's remarkable, really, that the Russians can get so worked up about drones. I think 4 years ago, that would not have been the case. Drones were almost sort of considered a bit of a bit player in this war. But Ukraine has had phenomenal success with its drones, which I think is why the Russians are so concerned about them. And the Ukrainians have also had phenomenal success building, constructing, inventing drones. But the UK contribution is clearly something that rattles the Russians. Otherwise, they wouldn't be using this kind of belligerent language. But by the way, I really liked your introduction of yourself as belligerent, Hugo Rifkin. But it's clearly something that has rattled the Russians. The UK contribution is not going to be a determining factor in this war, but clearly something that is getting under the Russian skin, and that they want to prevent, and think that they can prevent by threatening and really threatening ad hominem harm to people in the UK.
And look, the state of relations between Russia and the UK these days, involving cyber attacks, sabotage, activity in the sea, below the threshold of open warfare, are things escalating?
It has been a phenomenal, or rather, I should say, shocking escalation over the past 4.5 years. I've been in the in the business of monitoring sub-threshold Russian threats and threats from other countries now for many years. And it used to be a pretty manageable task. It used to be cyber disinformation, election interference, a few assassination attempts. Now we are seeing the Russians invent something new on an almost weekly basis, monthly basis. And Hugo, I think that the problem is that the Russians have taken leave of any sense of respectability. And once you've taken leave of any sense of respectability, you can invent a way in the grey zone because you don't care if other countries condemn you, if other countries find out that you are behind a particular attack or string of attacks. And that is the situation we're in now.
And what kind of flashpoint should we be most worried about? Is it some kind of retaliation for drone strikes like this? Is it some kind of open sort of confrontation in the North Sea, for example? What kind of thing should be keeping us up at night specifically?
Well, I think what really concerns me are attacks and intrusions into critical national infrastructure. And critical national infrastructure can be anything from the provision of power and water to the internet to transportation. And the reason that that's so concerning is that if CNI stops working, even just for a few minutes or an hour, the effects are enormous. And they then pile up because, for example, if the railway system were to become dysfunctional for 15 minutes, that would cause all kinds of delays. Similarly, at airports, so knock-on effects. But then another thing I'm really worried about are threats to the lives of individuals in our countries. We have seen, for example, in Germany, 2 Russian plots against defense executives. Now, we have thought now for decades that business people are neutral. They just they are in the business of making money. Now there are threats to their lives as well, or attempts to intimidate them, to prevent them from doing their work by frightening them. That is really it's not what a respectable country does, but. Again, Russia has no ambition of being a respectable country anymore. So that's something that we should pay attention to as well, and try to take precautions to prevent.
Thank you very much indeed. That is Elizabeth Braw, security expert and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you very much indeed, Elizabeth.